Hello everyone, my name's Ivan, call sign Kempo, and this is going to be my first ever board game tutorial video. I'm going to start with one of my favorite games, which is called Tyrants of the Underdark. Tyrants of the Underdark is made by Gale Force 9, or distributed by Gale Force 9, in conjunction with Dungeons & Dragons, and it is one of my favorite games. I really enjoy it because it has aspects of Magic the Gathering in the deck building, and it also has area control similar to, I would imagine, Risk and games like Game of Thrones, but it's a much simpler game, easier to play, and plays a lot faster. So let's move down to the board and we'll see how the game plays. So the game has a standard board where you have locations that are listed by their names and these little squares or these big circles. The big circles are special locations, which I'll get into later. And in order to control a location, you have to have a number of shields for your particular troops out on the board. The game often works with control, and if you have the majority of your color of shields on the board, you have control of that location. If you have every spot on the location covered, then you have full control of the location. If you have full control of the special locations, you will then be able to take the token for that special location. Now, the numbers you see on the locations are point values. So if you have partial control, you will get a certain amount of points at the end of the game. If you have full control, you will get all of the points at the end of the game. If you have these special tokens, you will also get 2 victory points for total control. And if you flip that token over, this is just regular control. You don't get victory points for regular control, but you do get what we call influence. You can also get victory points from buying cards. So everybody's going to start with a deck of cards, but you're going to buy cards throughout the game. Now, none of the cards are laid out yet, so you can't see them, but these are cards that you can always buy. So similar to Dominion as well, each card is going to have a cost in the top right hand corner. They call that influence to buy cards. And at the bottom of the cards, in the bottom right hand corner, you're going to have a point value. Now, there's 2 different point values. There's the point value if you have the card in your deck at the end of the game, and there's also the point value if you put your card in what we call the inner circle, which I'll get to later. Okay, I will show you what the inner circle looks like. Every player is going to have this little circular token, and that is the inner circle spot for your cards. So if your cards make it to the inner circle, they're worth slightly more points at the end of the game. These are cards similar to, again, in Dominion, where if you buy the Priestess of Lolth, you will get more influence to be able to buy more cards. So this gives you more money. And if you buy the House Guard, you will get more power, which allows you to do more attacking type of moves. The Insane Outcast is another type of card that you can play with, and it says discard a card from your hand, which return the Insane Outcast to the supply. If the Insane Outcast would be devoured or promoted, return it to the supply instead. So this basically allows you to discard a card from your hand, but then you lose this card as well. If you have this card in your hand at the end of the game, you will lose 1 point per card. So the setup for Tabletop Simulator is already done for us. Usually the setup requires you to put these guards in the position where you have the sword crossed icon, and each one of those sword crossed icons will get those guard shields. Now, the guards are there to give us something to fight when we first arrive at each one of these locations, which can actually be done with certain cards that you might buy. Just so that's not really easy. The black spaces are starting locations for your shields of your color, and everybody's going to put out a certain amount to start. Usually that goes in player order. So if we switch over to the rulebook, if we go to, and this is where you'll see the credits for the game. So it is a Dungeons and Dragons game. The game designers are here. And you can go to the setup of the game. So it explains to you how to set it up. Now, if you're playing with less than 4 players, there is a modified setup for that, where you don't play on all the sections of the boards. They also recommend that you play with a certain starting combination of decks. There are 4 decks in the base box, and there have been 2 expansion decks that have been released as well that you can buy. One little caveat about the expansion decks: I did purchase them, and unfortunately the cards are not the exact same quality as the cards that came in the box. But in my experience, that makes very little difference. When they're shuffled in with the other cards, you can really barely tell that there is a difference. So it hasn't really affected the gameplay that much. But I know some people don't like that, so I'm letting you know that if you do like the game and you buy the expansions, to expect that the cards aren't exactly the same quality. So depending on which decks you use, it says here if you're playing with the Demons half deck, you will be putting the Insane Outcast cards face up in their marked space. So we will not be playing with the Insane Outcast cards, as we will not be playing with the Demons. It then says to put the top 6 cards of the market deck face up in the market, which we will do now. So I'll go back to the board here. Now, one thing I found strange about the game is that the market deck is kind of set up upside down to the game board. So I actually always put my cards facing the players, not facing the order or the direction that the market card deck is recommending here. So basically exactly like it's set up here. So if you look at the board, you're actually looking at this market deck upside down, but that's just the way that it's set up, so it's not that big of a deal. So we are going to be playing with the Dragon and Drow deck, which is the recommended starting deck. So we will take those 2 decks, flip them upside down. And if you don't know how to do that in Tabletop Simulator, you can move things around. If you want to move an entire deck, you just click and hold down to be able to move the entire deck. If you click and drag very quickly, you will draw 1 card. And if you want to shuffle, you just pick up the deck by clicking and holding down, and then shake the cards, and that will shuffle the deck. We will then put that in the market deck here. I'm going to take the Insane Outcasts off the board since we're not using them, and I will distribute and flip. Now, to flip a card, you press F, and as you can see, they are coming out the wrong way. So by turning my mouse wheel, oh, it won't allow me to do it. All right, never mind. I would actually prefer these cards to be facing the other way, but okay. So this is your market. Let's go back to the rules. And it says put white unaligned troop pieces in all the troop spaces. That's what I've already explained. I call them guards, but troops. And put the site control markers in their marked spaces on the game map with the total control side face up. So that is your big circles that I've already mentioned. You can place your victory tokens out. There is a spot to put that on the board. They are in a bag on Tabletop Simulator, so we'll just leave them in the bags. Randomly choose who will take the first turn. And then each player does the following: choose a drow house and take the playmat, colors, and all that with you. Everybody's going to have the same starting deck of cards, which is 7 noble cards and 3 soldier cards, which I'll show you in a minute. And you're going to draw 5 cards. And then, starting with the first player, each player will deploy a troop in any starting site on the game map not already taken by another player. Starting sites are those marked with black boxes. So that was what I was explaining. So if we go back to the board here, now with Tabletop Simulator, if I wanted to draw a card, I could right click, and as you can see, you get a menu here. If I click on draw, the card will come into my hand, which I can see here. Now the problem with that is you can also see it down here, and you can zoom in on cards by pressing the Alt key. That was the wrong key. Okay, so you can zoom in very closely on cards to be able to read them properly. The only issue is if I want to show you multiple plays from different players, I won't be able to draw cards from other players' hands, because right now I'm the white player, so I'd only be able to draw cards from the white player's deck. So I'm actually going to put the cards out somewhere on the board so we can see them a little bit better. So if I'm the starting player, I'm going to place one of my troops down on one of the black starting locations. Now I don't have to choose a starting location close to me, but I will, just to make things a little easier. Now the thing is, some starting locations are better than others because they're worth more points at the end of the game. So this starting location is worth 4 points at the end of the game. This starting location is worth 3 points. Also, when I was mentioning that this Menzo Beranzan's token was worth 2 victory points per turn if you have full control, not all of them have the same amount of victory points per turn. So this one, for instance, has 3 victory points per turn, so it's actually a little bit more powerful than all of the other ones. A lot of them are just 1 victory point per turn, but the more you go to the center of the board, they're worth a little bit more. So so I'm going to put my token out on the board here. It's a little bit hard to see because it's black and the board is fairly dark. And let's say we take the red player's troop, and the red player is going to choose to put one here. So the rules do say to not put a starting troop in a starting location that another player has chosen. So you do have to choose a different location. So I'm going to put the orange one here, and I'm going to put the blue one here, just to distribute it a little bit out there on the board. And you can occupy any empty space. There's no problem with that. Combat only is initiated with the play of cards. So, how does the game play? Everybody's going to have, and I'm going to actually show you the entire deck of cards here. I'll shuffle them again in a second. So everybody starts with 10 cards. So very, very similar to Dominion. You're going to have a certain number of cards that are designed for buying and a certain number of cards that are designed for, in this game, fighting. Okay, so if you look at your nobles give you influence. The web stands for influence. The soldiers give you power, and I'll explain what you can do with those in a second. But just to show you the difference, I also wanted to show you that these cards, these starting cards, are worth 0 points at the end of the game if they're in your hand, but they're all worth 1 point if you put them in the inner circle. Remember, the inner circle is here. Okay, so let's just group these up, flip them over, and put them on our playmats. So they talk about the playmats in the rules. I'm just going to give those a good shuffle. And what we're doing, the playmats are really, really good to tell you exactly what you do. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is draw 5 cards. And just like in Dominion, there are cards that allow you to draw more cards later on. So I have a handful of influence here, which would be used to basically buy cards. Okay, so what is your turn order? So in any order, we can play a card, we can deploy a troop, and to deploy a troop, you need power. Deploying a troop, now there's a very, very important rule in this game that is based on something called presence. So let me go to the rulebook here and show you what I mean. So right here it talks about presence. Most actions you take on the game map require you to have presence where you take the action. You have presence at any site where you have a spy, a troop, or a troop in a space adjacent to that site, or at any troop space on a route if that space is adjacent to a site or space where you already have a troop. So basically, adjacency or in the same location is where you have presence. So you can't just put a troop out anywhere. Now they talk about spies here, and I'll get back to that in a second. But right now, as the player with the black shields, I only have one spot where I have a troop in that spot, but I also have adjacency to these two locations. So you can start moving around the board by doing that, okay? By placing troops down in those spots. So I only have one power, which means I can only deploy a troop right now with that one power. But you can see some of the other things you can do. With 3 power, you can assassinate somebody else's troop. Again, you have to have presence to do that, all right? You can return an enemy spy for 3 power. So let me talk about spies. Every player has 5 spies. These are slightly different models. Let me see if I can zoom in here. They don't look like shields. They actually look like little assassins, okay, or spies. Certain cards are going to allow you to place spies out on the board. Now, spies don't go on the circles. They actually go adjacent to a location. And as soon as you put a spy out, and usually you can put the spy out anywhere on the board, you now have presence next to that location. That means it's pretty powerful to put out a spy. In order to return an enemy spy, so if you want to get rid of somebody's spy, you have to play 3 power to do that. Recruiting a card is the same thing as buying a card. I think I was talking about buying a card. Recruiting a card for the amount of influence equal to its cost is the next thing is one of the things you can do. And remember, you can do these in any order as many times as you want, as long as you have the appropriate amount of cards to actually spend to do so. Then if you had one of the victory point tokens, so one of these tokens, you could gain victory points. So that becomes very powerful because that happens every turn, all right, that you start getting those victory points. You would discard your played cards from your hand, and there's a discard pile right here, and then you draw up to 5 cards. So anybody who's played Dominion, this is going to look very, very similar to that, all right? So I have 4 influence and 1 power. So I'm going to spend my power to place another troop out on the board. And I'm going to place my troop out here. Actually, I'm going to start moving towards the center of the board. So I'm going to put my troop out here. I don't know if that's the best strategy, but I'm going to do that, okay? And then I'm going to look at what cards I can buy for 4 influence. So remember that the price of the cards is up in the top right-hand corner. Definitely can't buy the green dragon. Can't buy the Master of Amelie Magthair, but I can buy pretty much any of the other cards. So let's look at some of the things, and the deck is a little bit intimidating, and this is going to be the slowest part to learning the game for anybody who's just learning the game for the first time. But what's nice is a lot of the cards do repeat. So once you start to see what cards do, then you start to know just by looking at them what their abilities are. Another thing you'd want to look at is how many points that they might give you. So usually a more expensive card is going to give you a lot more points, especially if you put it in the inner circle. All right. So Watcher of Thay, choose one. So you have to choose which of the powers you would activate by playing this card. You could either place a spy, or you could return one of your spies. And if you return one of your spies, the little arrow means you also get this benefit, which would be 3 more influence to spend on your turn. So this is a card that could give you more money to buy things as long as you have spies out on the board, and it allows you to actually place spies. which is probably the card I'm going to buy, but let's look at some of the other cards that are available. Can't buy that one, it's too expensive. I only have 4 influence. So this is 3 influence. Supplant a white troop. Now, what does supplant mean? So there are some keywords that we need to know when we play the game, and I like to always go to the rule book to make sure that I'm using the powers correctly. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the quick reference page at the very end of the rule book, and you can see that there are quite a few really nice things to reference here when it comes to playing the game. Supplant a troop means assassinate a troop where you have presence and then deploy one of your troops in the newly vacated space. This is actually a very, very powerful ability because normally you can't replace a troop with one of your own. You fight the troop's gone, but that's it. This card allows you to do 2 things: assassinate the troop and replace it with one of your own. So the word supplant is a very, very powerful thing. This is actually a very good card. And it's a very good card to have at the beginning of the game because there's more white troops on the board now than any other troop, right? So this is actually a very, very good card to have at the beginning of the game. And as a strategy, you could then place it in the inner circle later on, and I'll show you how to do that when it comes up, to get 3 points at the end of the game. So let me just talk about placing cards in the inner circle. You can only do that with an ability on a card. This one talks about inner circle cards. If there are 4 or more cards in your inner circle, gain influence, 3 of them. At the end of your turn, promote another card played this turn. So this is exactly what I was just talking about. What does the word promote mean? So let's go back to the quick reference card. Promoting a card means put the card face up on your inner circle board. So this card would actually allow us to do that. So that's another really good card to have. And you can start promoting later on. So you might not want to buy this one right away, but somebody else might buy it if you don't buy it. Okay. So now I'm actually leaning, like these 3 cards are actually all very good cards. So let's go look at the white wormling and see what it does. Deploy 2 troops. You may devour a card in the market. So devouring a card in the market is basically destroying a card in the market that you might think somebody else might want. So that's a strategy, right? It's kind of like the reverse of hate drafting. It's hate destroying. And deploying 2 troops is also a very, very good card to have. So now I have a dilemma because I really like these 4 cards. However, I think the supplanting a white troop is the best one for me right now. So I am going to buy that card. It goes into your discard pile. And that cost 3 influence. So I'm going to discard those 3 cards now. I don't think I can buy anything for just 1. So remember that you always have these 2 cards. Oh, let me get rid of these again. How did they get back there? So you always have these 2 cards that you can buy as well. And just like Dominion, if you've ever played Dominion, it's extra money or extra power. But that's more expensive than I have cards able to buy, so I'm just going to discard this card as well. And that is the end of my turn. So if we go in clockwise direction, I have not yet shuffled everybody's decks, so I'm going to do that right now. Let's see what this player might do. Now, because I bought a card from the market, it immediately gets replaced by another card. And this is another new card, so let's just go and look at what this one does. Choose 1, gain 2 influence, and at the end of your turn, promote another card played this turn. So it's another card that allows you to promote. Promoting, remember, is putting a card in your inner circle, which isn't necessarily good to have at the beginning of the game, because usually you don't want to promote near the beginning of the game, unless it's promoting your basic cards. So let's just flip these over. These are your basic cards. You may want to promote those right away, so it's really up to your own strategy here. So let's see what we have. So we have basically the exact same draw as I had, right? So most likely I'm going to put out, so where do I have presence? I have presence right here. So I am going to actually, just to change strategies a little bit, I'm going to put out a troop on my original spot instead of starting to spread out. And then I'm going to choose a card to buy. So I've already used my power. I've got 4 influence to be able to spend. You know what? I am just going to buy the Watcher of Thay. I thought that card was pretty good. So this one goes into my discard pile, and I've spent all of my influence. I can't buy anything else. We go to the orange player's turn. So the orange player's turn, draw 5 cards. Again, same exact distribution of cards. I'm not even sure if I shuffled. So let's put out a troop. You know what? For this one, I'm going to put here so that I can start maybe getting presents in Gauntlgrim to be able to get that. And let's go see the market. We replace the card. So we have the Enchanter of Thay, which allows you to place a spy for 4. You know what? I think I'm going to buy that card for that player. We'll group these, discard them. And as you can see, the play is pretty quick, at least for the first round. So let's give these a shuffle as well. Draw 5 cards. Here, let me put them here. And exact same distribution of cards again. So let's put one of our troops out. Where are our red troops here? Oh, right over there. So I'm going to put one of those red troops. Actually, I'm going to start spreading out towards Menzoberranzan for that one. And then let's go look at the market. I have 4 to spend. Oh, I'm going to take out another market card. You know what? Because I have 4 to spend, I'm going to buy 2 cards. Now, as soon as you buy a card, another one replaces itself in the market. So you can always look at the next card before you make your purchase, but that one's too expensive now. So I'm going to buy these 2 cards because that adds up to 4, and I have 4 to spend. I will put those in my discard pile. I will put all of these in my discard pile. Oops. Okay. I'm going to have to group them first. And that is the first round. Okay. Now the first player token is only necessary for end of game conditions. So if we look at the quick reference card here, the end of game triggers when one of the following occurs. A player deploys his or her last remaining troop. The market deck becomes empty. And when the end of game triggers, play proceeds until the end of the round. So that's why we need to know who the first player is, because you just finished that round, at which point the game ends, and then we count points. Okay? So speaking of points, so let's look at final scoring before we continue. So at the end of the game, use the score. There's a score pad that usually comes with the game, which they don't have on the Tabletop Simulator. But each player will score the following points. The victory point value of each site you control, 2 victory points for each site under your total control. So you get the full points of the, which I may have made a mistake on earlier. You get the full points of the sites you have partial control of, but if you have total control, you get an extra 2 victory points. Okay? 1 victory point for each troop in your trophy hall. So there are going to be cards that are going to allow you to supplant or assassinate other people's shields, other people's troops. So you get 1 point for each one of those. The deck victory point value for each card in your deck, hand, and discard pile. So those are the points that I showed you in the bottom right corner of the card. And then the inner circle victory point value for each card in your inner circle. Also, because when you get the tokens for those special sites, those give you victory points. You also get to add up the victory point tokens gained during the game from those. Okay, so there's multiple ways of getting victory points in the game, which is actually quite interesting because it just allows you for that much more variation in gameplay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pretend that I had actually played all those cards, and let's just put out another troop here in that position. And let's say your deck was empty. What would happen? Well, at that point, you pick up your deck, and remember the deck now contains new cards that you would have bought, right? So you flip that over, you give it a shuffle, and then you draw 5 more cards. So now you have a chance of picking up some of the cards that you bought, like I just did. So we're still drawing 5 cards, but I now have this card in my hand that I can play. And it is just supplant a white troop. It doesn't cost anything. I can just do it. Now it has to be somewhere I have presence. So I have presence. Well, I actually don't have presence anywhere. So actually the shield I put out, let's pretend I had put it here instead. Now I have presence next to the Faelrin, however you say that word. Okay, so I can supplant one of those white troops because I have presence there. So I take one of my troops, I literally replace that troop, and it goes into my trophy house, and I replace it with one of mine. Okay, so that's what supplant does. Now you'll notice, oh, it's not trophy house, it's trophy hall. You'll notice that my trophy hall is right here. Okay, barracks is where you're supposed to actually have lined up all your troops on the board, but I'm going to keep them in the bag so that they're not taking up a lot of room on the table. All right, so then I could buy more cards. Okay, so let's go over to this player. Now I can't remember which player had bought the spy. Ah, that's the one. So let's pretend. I just want to show you how the spy works. Let's see if I can actually literally draw that card. If not, I'll just pull it out of the deck. Ha, first card. So the Watcher of Thay allows me to place a spy. Now, when you place a spy, it's one of the only things that you don't need presence for. So this is how this would work. Now, this is the blue player. Imagine the blue player wanted to start, they were interested in this location because that location has 4 points at the end of the game. Better yet, I think that's the one that has the most. Better yet, they're interested in this location because it has 5 points at the end of the game plus the token. Well, that player could place this card in their discard pile, activate that power, and put a spy there. And now they have presence in that location. So anything that requires presence, they could actually use. So if they had a soldier out instead of one of the nobles, they could now play a card, deploy a troop in that location. And now they have permanent presence there until that troop is supplanted or killed. Okay? So that's basically how the game plays. You play until the end conditions that I've already mentioned. The end conditions are one player loses or puts out all of their troops. There are 40 troops in each bag. And you're going to start getting some encounters between players, especially with those spies out, which is a very interesting game. And the value of having all of these cards. So I just drew another card here. This is a kobold. So choose one, deploy a troop, or assassinate a white troop. So assassination means just destroy that shield, put it in your trophy hall, which will count as a point at the end of the game, but you do not supplant. So there's a difference between the words supplant and assassinate. Okay, and if we look at some of the other cards, let's see if we can find some new ones. So choose one. So this is just a card that gives you more power or influence. There's another Watcher of Thay. Mercenary Squad, deploy 3 troops. Pretty powerful card. Bounty Hunter, just more power. Here's another one that allows you to place a spy or return one of your spies to draw 3 cards. So having spies out on the board can really give you some interesting powers. We already saw the Advocate, so you're already starting to see how some of those cards can, oh, there's another Advocate, can repeat. The Infiltrator, place a spy. If another player's troop is at that site, gain 1 power. So these cards can really play off of each other. There's all kinds of different strategies. Plus, there are 2 other completely different decks, which you can mix and match. You only ever choose 2 decks at a time. And plus, in the actual game, there's the expansion that you can use as well. So this is giving you a pretty good overview as to how this game plays. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, one of my favorite games. It's very fun. It's kind of like playing Dominion, but with a area control aspect attached to it. And I've had a lot of fun. Everybody I've introduced this game to. I personally like the Dungeons and Dragons theme, obviously. Which is very strong in this game, but you don't really have to know anything about Dungeons and Dragons to still be able to play. And I've played with people that don't know anything about it, and as long as they're not turned off by the theme, they really enjoy the strategy of playing the cards and buying cards to work through your deck. So the only thing I didn't show is how to promote a card. There were a couple of cards that allow you to promote. What happens when you promote a card is you just take the card and you put it here face down, and that's now placed in your inner circle. So that at the end of the game will be worth the inner circle points instead of just the card points. And it's a good way of culling some of the cards that are your basic cards out of your deck once you start getting more powerful cards. So that's basically how the game works. I hope you enjoyed my very first review, folks, and go out and support your board game companies by buying this game. It's a fantastic game. So just to show you that I actually own the game, now I bought these bit boxes from a Kickstarter a long time ago to organize my games, and I have the bits for the game in here. I'm not going to pull out the entire thing, but just to show you that I actually own the game, here are the inner circle tokens. Here are some of the shields and some of the cards. So I just want to show you that I actually do own the game, so that it doesn't look like I'm just playing it on Tabletop Simulator.